It's a lot to ask for, right? That you have to maintain your moral compass and your hopeful optimism in the face of the worst that can happen to you. But what the hell's your alternative? If the chickens do come home to roost and things start to go badly for you, and you are terrified by that and embittered as a consequence, and then you turn away from what's positive and highest, all it's going to happen. It's because that which you most need to find is always lurking where you least want to look. That's a good leitmotif for life. So you could imagine that there are things in your life that you're avoiding that you should do, that you don't want to confront, that frighten you, that activate your predator detection systems, let's say. And if you can learn to organize yourself so that you have enough courage to take on that chaotic unknown, then you'll discover things about yourself and the world that you don't know and master them. And the consequence of that will be that you'll be rewarded. And that's, of course, the treasure that the dragon eternally guards. And the rule of thumb is fundamentally, well, the larger the dragon, the more likely you're going to get eaten. But by the same token, the larger the story from Exodus, it's the story of the burning bush, which is kind of a mysterious story. And so here's how that story essentially goes. So Moses is trying to find his way, right? He's trying to identify his destiny, and he's off wandering down a pathway, minding his own business one day, and something attracts his attention. It sort of glitters and glimmers off to the side, and it pulls him towards it. Now he has to decide to step off the path and go investigate. The story makes that quite clear. And this is a burning bush, not a burning forest. It's not so overwhelming that you can't avoid it. All right. And so Moses goes and decides he's going to go investigate this thing that captures his interest. And as he gets closer to it, he starts to hear a divine voice. And the first thing the voice tells him as he gets closer is that he's on sacred ground and that he should take off his shoes. And then he starts to interact with this strange phenomenon, this burning bush, and God himself reveals his name to Moses. So first of all, it's not a straightforward matter to tell the truth, partly because, what the hell do you know? We're all steeped in ignorance, right? So none of us are, in the final analysis, capable of telling the truth. We can get better at approximating the truth with time, but we don't have full access to all knowledge, and so everything we say is going to be partial. Now, having said that, it's still perfectly reasonable to distinguish between what's true and what isn't. How do you start doing that? Well, someone might say, I don't know how to distinguish between what's true and what's not true in the final analysis. And I would say to them, yeah, but you'll find times in your life where you're inclined to say something or do something, to say something you know to be false or to do something you know to be wrong. Now, there may be times when you're ambiguous and ambivalent and you don't know, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those times when you actually know. And you can tell, because if you're going to say something that you know to be false, it fragments you internally. It makes you weak. You feel what could be the ground under your feet shifting. You're lying and you're betraying yourself. And I would say, and this was the purpose of that rule, was, well, stop doing that. First, stop doing that. Just stop saying all the things that you are saying that you know perfectly well to be false. And then at the same time, you can stop doing all the things you know that you shouldn't do. Well, what will happen as a consequence is that your speech will become more precise and your vision will become clearer, because you're not cluttering yourself up with obvious falsehoods. And then if you continue doing that, your capacity to distinguish between what's true and what's false gets more and more sophisticated. And if you do that long enough, you might actually get to the point where you could actually start to tell the truth instead of just not lying. At least some truths, at least some of the time. And that's a pretty good start. And then that can expand out across time. as you become expert at this. And then you might say, well, why bother doing that? And I can tell you why you should bother doing that. It's very straightforward. There will come a time in your life where you have to make a very fine decision. It might be one that your life depends on, or the life of someone you love, or a relationship depends on, or your business depends upon. And you'll be torn apart at the point where you have to make that decision. And if you can't rely on yourself at that moment to make the right decision, you could lose everything. Now, you might ask yourself, well, how do you ensure that you can rely on yourself in a situation like that? And I would say, well, if you spent 20 years practicing lying, you can be bloody well sure that when push comes to shove, you're going to make the wrong decision. You're going to want to be, when things get rough around you, you're going to want to be in a situation where your eye is clear and your tongue is sharp. And so if you've practiced diligently, one might even say religiously, to abide by the truth, then when you're cornered and the chips are down and you have to go left or right, and one of them leads up and the other leads down, you're going to pick the right route. And if you know that, like if you meditate on that, if you understand that that's coming, that can scare you badly enough so that you'll stop saying things you know to be false. You'll pay the price for that. Then you add another interesting twist to that. You said that often people, these are more subtle liars, they'll sort of half tell the truth. They'll tell the truth in a way that enables them to manipulate towards an end. Yeah, well, that's a particularly pathological form of lying. That's actually using the Lord's name in vain, by the way. You know that famous commandment? Do not use the Lord's name in vain. That doesn't mean to not swear. It means do not pretend to be serving God when you're not. And that's that kind of lie that you described. Telling the truth is a very tricky issue because you have to be aiming up in all ways to ensure that what you're relating isn't manipulatively self-serving at some subtle level. And it takes a long time to orient yourself at enough levels simultaneously so that you're no longer playing those sorts of games. But you do that by practicing. You do that by practicing not lying. It's like, you try to make that a vow. And you can clear yourself up an awful lot. A lot of what you do with people in psychotherapy, huge part of it, is you help them disentangle themselves from the web of lies that they found themselves trapped within. Decades of lies sometimes, or multiple lifetimes even, because you do see families from time to time that are so wrapped up in lies that it goes back 3 or 4 generations. It's just lies nonstop at every possible level. And so all of that has to be sorted out. And you often are doing that working as a psychotherapist. You can do that with a sustained moral effort on your own behalf. I mean, part of what you're doing if you're a religious practitioner and you go and confess is that you're trying to remind yourself about what lies you're telling. And you do that